to get this across the finish line. New Hampshire is the first state to get it done. Representative Keith Ammon out there has been a champion of Bitcoin policy for many years. In fact, he's the first lawmaker to ever use Satoshi Action model policy way back in 2022.
This episode is brought to you by Trezor. Trezor makes beautifully crafted hardware wallets that allow you to easily and safely store your crypto assets. Trezor's been in the game for a very long time. Since 2013, they were the pioneers of hardware wallets in the seed phrase setup, and their hardware wallets are open source. In fact, my favorite is the Trezor Safe 5. It's a beautifully designed and easy to use hardware wallet, guys, and it's my go-to. And they support a variety of coins, all your top crypto tokens, your Bitcoins, your XRP, Ethereum, Solana, and much more. And even new coins, even BlackRock's BITL token. So they support coins on the institutional side where you have tokenization of different assets and much more. And they even offer a great service that helps you to get your Trezor device set up. You get one-on-one customer support from their team, so you can check that out as well. So once again, I'm a big fan of this hardware wallet. So if you'd like to learn more, visit the link in the description. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me today is Dennis Porter, who's the CEO and co-founder of the Satoshi Action Fund. Dennis, great to have you. Great news yesterday. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, man. Pumped to be on here with you. Glad to be back on the show, fan of the show, and excited to have, this is the first one, right? The first show where we get to talk about Strategic Bitcoin Reserve actually being passed into law. So excited to talk about all things policy and what's happening and what's next.
So let's get into it. New Hampshire, first state to pass a Bitcoin Reserve Bill into law. This is huge, historic, groundbreaking. How did this come about? I know you and the folks at the Satoshi Action Fund have been doing a lot of work over the past years.
Yes, this has been a major priority for us. Even going back before Trump ever announced that he was going to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we had been pushing states to study the purchase of Bitcoin, which is an incremental step towards the inevitable buying of Bitcoin. And we were also really excited when in November, we got that first strategic Bitcoin reserve bill introduced at the state level in Pennsylvania by Representative Cabell, who really opened the floodgates, right? Like as soon as he introduced it, we didn't think so many states were going to introduce it. We thought maybe we'd get 3 or 4 to introduce it. And now we've got 20 plus states that have made these introductions. So it was very, very exciting to see that take place. And then from there, from those introductions, we worked through a lot of different states. Some states came really close. We almost got it. But I couldn't be more excited to have gotten it across the finish line, not just for us as the organization. This has been a big mandate for us. This has been a big and really important policy vertical for us, but also really for the Bitcoin community, because this is something that the whole community has wanted and has been pushing for and has been, writing their lawmakers, and they've been donating to Satoshi Action, and they've been wanting to see it get done. So we're very, very happy to have come forward and come through on our promise to get this across the finish line. New Hampshire is the first state to get it done. Representative Keith Ammon out there has been a champion of Bitcoin policy for many years. In fact, he's the first lawmaker to ever use Satoshi Action model policy way back in 2022. I know it's not that long ago, but crypto's like dog years. So back in 2022, he was the first lawmaker to ever use one of our models. And he also later won the Lawmaker of the Year award. So we've got a great relationship with him, and we couldn't be more happy for him and also for his state to see it get done, and also to see the governor do a signing ceremony. Like the governors don't do signing ceremonies for every bill. So she actually put together a whole signing ceremony, took time out of her very busy day to make sure that this bill got the attention that it needed, and to show that New Hampshire was proud to be the first state to pass strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation into law.
Just amazing. And Dennis, I've been saying on the podcast that these bills making it through the different chambers is a win by itself. Even if one of these bills are not signed into law this year, the ball is rolling and we're making progress. But to our surprise, an actual bill was signed into law. Tell us about the details of how they're going to be able to execute the buying of Bitcoin. Is it through ETFs? Is it directly from exchanges? And how are they doing the custody and much more?
Yeah, it's a great question. But going back to your point about how it is a process to get these bills done, and that just passing it out of a single chamber is, honestly, getting the introduction is a win. And then getting it to pass through committee is a win. And then we got it passed in a chamber in multiple states. And I know, like, at the end of the day, the only thing that truly matters is passing it into law. But it's a huge signal to lawmakers all across the country when they see these things actually get passed through a chamber. We passed it in the chamber in Utah. We almost passed it in the second chamber. We just got snagged up one little bit at the end, but we'll be back to Utah. Same with Oklahoma. We passed it in the chamber there and it got snagged in committee. But people need to appreciate those wins, because just a year ago, the idea of a state passing a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill, even in a single chamber, would have been thought, unthinkable. And so we were able to shift that narrative, and we were to shift the Overton window. But of course, obviously, passing it into law is a much, much bigger win, and we're very excited that we got there. Now that we've got the bill passed into law, the big thing is moving to the next steps of how these allocations will take place. So from the time that the governor signs the bill, it takes 60 days for the bill to go, to be enacted, essentially, to really actually become law, even though it has been signed. And from there, the treasurer can make allocations into Bitcoin. They can buy Bitcoin from an ETF. They could buy Bitcoin directly. They can custody the Bitcoin with a regulated custodian. Most states are probably going to go the ETF path by nature, sure, simply for the fact that they're used to these products. ETF products are very popular in states. State treasurers already allocate into those ETFs. And a lot of the ETF providers that they already work with, like Fidelity, BlackRock, others, or are offering Bitcoin ETFs. So that'll probably be a pretty natural fit for a lot of these treasurers and a lot of these states to go that direction. But we don't need to encourage them that direction. We're perfectly fine with them, and would be happy to see them buy Bitcoin directly and then work with one of the great custodians out there. Fidelity is a custodian. Anchorage is a great custodian. Coinbase has great custodian relationships. Gemini is also a custodian. So there's a lot of these great companies that can help them to hold their Bitcoin and also do it in a transparent way if they choose to do so. And we hope that the states do go that path.
Question for you on cities within the state. Is this bill kind of overarching? It covers the cities, or is just on the state level? Because the reason I ask, I'm in New Jersey, and I heard the mayor of Jersey City talk about doing this for the city. So do the cities move on their own, or they follow the state's lead?
So the cities will move on their own. The counties will move on their own. This is a bill just for the state. So the state and the treasurer can allocate it to Bitcoin. The cities and the states will need to approach it from their own process if they wanted to go that path.
Interesting. But I'm assuming it's going to make it easy for the cities to do it if the state is doing it, and they kind of have
absolutely
print, right?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it makes it easier for everybody. This isn't just easier for the city or the counties in a state that passed it. It's also easier for other states to pass it, because the funny part is you have this dynamic where no state, like the body of legislators, want to be the first one to do anything.
Yeah.
They want to be the second or the third or the fourth. Like, they want to be the one. They don't want, what do they say is the common line? It's like, pioneers get arrows in their back, right? So oftentimes nobody wants to be the first. Now, the lawmaker who introduced the bill, of course, he wants to be first, right? Like, that's why they do it. That's why they go out and they take these risks to push forward cutting edge policy like this. But going from one lawmaker, Representative Keith Ammon, to convincing 51% of over 400 lawmakers in the state to want to get on board with this, and New Hampshire has one of the third largest legislative bodies, like I think in the entire Western world or something like that. It's barely smaller than Congress, and it's a tiny little state. So it's a lot of lawmakers you got to convince. And so, to go from one lawmaker to 200 plus lawmakers being on board is a totally different picture. Of course, Representative Keith Ammon, being a champion of this bill, wants to see it get done. He wants to be the first. He was the first. But convincing the other state lawmakers that it's a good idea to be first on something that no one's ever done before, when they really don't know much about Bitcoin at all, is a totally different task. So, but passing it now in one state also helps the other states who are like, well, we don't want to be first. Well, that's not a problem anymore. You don't have to worry about being the one to be the guinea pig, because New Hampshire is going to do it for you. I'll even go a step further and say that this also helps on the national conversation and helps on the international conversation, because everyone is going to start looking at New Hampshire and going, okay, wow, this has been done. There was the political support to get it there, and it got across the finish line, and nothing blew up. So strategic Bitcoin reserve policy being passed into law is huge. If you want to see it done at the federal level, I think it's actually much more important that the states do it than the federal government. Federal government has, the reserve currency of the world. They've got unlimited budgets and unlimited money printer. Certainly, I think having some Bitcoin at the federal level matters to me personally. But from just like a policy perspective, like a smart approach to how we want to govern ourselves, the states are much more inclined to be able to need a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because in the last 6-7 years, since 2018, the dollar has lost 25% of its purchasing power. And we did a whole paper on this, a whole write-up using empirical data to show that the states that have these budgets, when they're sitting on this money, if you're just sitting in cash, you're losing 25% of your purchasing power. Well, that's really bad for a state that doesn't have an unlimited money printer, doesn't have an unlimited budget. They actually have to make their budgets line up with the funds that are coming in. Otherwise, they're going to go bankrupt. They might have to cut services. They might have to raise taxes. All of those things are very bad for the residents of those states. The United States can keep printing money. It doesn't desperately need a strategic Bitcoin reserve, even though I support it at the federal level.
Right.
But passing it in New Hampshire absolutely provides fuel to the fire of the idea of getting it done at the federal level through legislation. Because, of course, Trump created through executive order, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which technically hasn't been funded yet. So we'll see when they audit the Bitcoin and actually put it together. But ultimately, folks like even Senator Lummis are very happy to see these things happen at the state level. She was a state treasurer in Wyoming, and she understands the value of moving legislation forward at the state level to provide that political support for these ideas at the federal level. And she said just as much in our interview when we sat down just a couple of months ago in her office in Washington, D.C. We did an interview with Nico, Simply Bitcoin. I encourage people to look it up and go watch that interview, because multiple times she says that the importance of states passing this it can't be understated, and that it's very important for her work at the federal level, because she can point to it and go, look, it's already happening. The states are already doing this, and we need to do it as well at the federal level.
Right. I was going to say that it's going to help the representatives from the different states in Congress. If it's happening in their state, it's the psychological barrier, the educational barrier is broken down, and it could be easier for them to Congress to pass this into law versus an executive order, which could be removed by another president. But if Congress buys in, that would be huge. And if the states do it, it's going to be easier to get Congress to buy in.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. And we know that's true because we've seen these things happen before. When you see a flurry of activity at the state level, then federal government reacts. We saw that with cannabis. We saw it with a woman's right to vote. We saw it with the civil rights movement. All of these things started at the state level and led to federal action. And that's why the design of the US is so valuable. The way that we have the ability to do these things at the state level is something that no other country has. It's something that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And it allows us to take good ideas and pass them into law to provide that political support, to generate the political momentum, to be able to, I wouldn't say force the federal government, but give them that ability to see that these things are happening and that they work. They call it the laboratory of democracy for a reason at the state level. It's a place where good ideas can be incubated and tested. I mean, even the things like FDIC insurance. FDIC insurance was not a manifestation at the federal level. It was something that started at the state level. They saw that it was working, and they created a federal program based on what they were seeing at the state level. So we couldn't be more lucky in the United States. I mean, there's a number of different reasons why we're lucky to be, in one of the greatest countries in human history to live here. But also, it's so valuable to be in a country that has this state process. They kind of tried to mimic it with the European Union, but it's just not the same. It's just they don't get the same outcomes. And they're not really unified. I mean, there's like dozens of different languages, dozens of different cultures. In the US, certainly we have a variety of different cultures, north to south, is certainly a different cultural approach, but we're all united under the United States, and we're all united under the same language and the same ideas when it comes to freedom and our interest in seeing the United States be a leader on things like Bitcoin. So super happy to see that we took the approach that we did pay off to be able to be active at the state level. A lot of people doubted us in the beginning. Yeah. They say the states don't matter, but we've proven them wrong time and time again. And we're still waiting really, truly for any meaningful legislation to come out of the federal level. I do hope stablecoin legislation makes it across the finish line. We're here today. I'm in DC right now, talking to a lot of lawmakers about stablecoin legislation, talking to them about market structure legislation, and hopefully we can get this type of stuff across the finish line. But it's still going to be a very big battle. Fingers crossed. I mean, we saw the Democrats come out in opposition of the stablecoin legislation. I do think that there is going to be a path forward potentially for them with this new draft that's coming from the Haggerty office to be able to help, go to remedy some of the concerns that they have about the current legislation. But we got to be able to get this stuff across the finish line so we can even have a chance at taking a look at strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation at the federal level.
Oh, absolutely. Now, with regards to the blueprint that you're taking to the different states, is it essentially the same thing? Or are there any unique aspects or customization done for different states?
100%. Every state is unique and different. They all have different ideas and ways they want to approach policy. So some states are going to want to do a Bitcoin only bill. Some states are going to want to use our market cap threshold model. And we have two models. It's funny because everybody kept saying, oh, the bill doesn't say Bitcoin. I'm like, well, that's the lawmakers that are choosing to do it that way because they understand how to get policy across the finish line. And same at Satoshi Action. It's really a credit to our policy director, Eric Peterson, who came up with this idea on how to create a sly roundabout way to say Bitcoin without actually saying Bitcoin. Because if you go into these conversations, think about it this way. You got to convince 200 lawmakers in the state of New Hampshire to vote in favor of this legislation. If you say Bitcoin and immediately they're going to go, well, why is it only Bitcoin? And then you have this big giant conversation about Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus Solana versus Litecoin. And it really muddies the water. And so that's why, even though we did create a Bitcoin only version, which some lawmakers will introduce and have introduced, and we'll see more of that probably pick up as time goes on, as lawmakers start to understand the difference and the value of Bitcoin over these other assets as a strategic reserve. But the part of the reason why we created this market cap threshold version was to basically say Bitcoin in code without actually saying the word Bitcoin, because then we can sidestep that conversation and move right into talking about the value of getting this thing across the finish line. The market cap threshold that we created was it's got to be over $750 billion for on average over 12 months. So that way, in case some random altcoin decides to surge over, some crazy number for a day, doesn't make it count. You got to have an entire year where you're over the $750 billion threshold. Now, in the state of New Hampshire, in order to get the political support necessary to get it across the finish line, the lawmaker there, Representative Keith Ammon, went with a $500 billion threshold. But that's still almost 250% higher than the second best coin. Ethereum is roughly around 200 billion right now. Right. And a lot of people have been watching the markets that are on this right now that are going to be listening to this. And Ethereum is having a really hard time, I think, growing because you've got these other coins that are competing. No one's competing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin, there's no second best. But you have a lot of competition between ETH and Solana and all these other L1s that want to compete to be the service provider essentially for things like stablecoins and smart contracts and DAOs and a variety of other types of utilities. And as they compete to provide those utility functions, it's a race to the bottom to be able to do it as quickly and efficiently as possible and for the lowest price. And so that's why you're seeing things like Solana take off, because Solana is cheaper and more efficient for providing those services. And that decentralization isn't necessarily helpful for getting those services to people. And so, certainly we really believe that strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation should only be Bitcoin. But we also know that politics is the art of the possible. And we want to make sure that we are making progress. And we can also circle back at future dates and raise that cap if necessary in New Hampshire and other states. But other states will take different approaches. Like I said, you've got some that are going to do Bitcoin only. Some are going to do $750 billion cap. Some are going to do 5% allocation or 10% allocation. There's all sorts of different approaches, including in the state of Arizona, where it's a radically different approach, where they want to use the unclaimed property fund to be able to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So basically the premise, and I'm going a little long here, so I'll finish up on this one. So the state of Arizona has a bill, HB 2749, from Representative Weniger, which would create a pathway for the state to be able to manage unclaimed digital assets. Right now, what happens is when there is unclaimed property in the digital asset space, most states are just taking it and liquidating it right away into cash and then holding that until someone comes along and says, oh, that's my property. That's my money. We don't like that. We don't want that to happen. That's not good That's not a good way to manage these assets. Because obviously, if you lose your Bitcoin, you lose access to it on like a Coinbase account or Gemini or one of the other exchanges. By law, they have to actually transfer that to the state, and then they're liquidating it into cash. Well, if you come back 3 years later and they liquidated your Bitcoin into cash, like you might have lost out on some serious gains. That'd be very disappointing. So we're working with these states to be able to put this policy in place. We think it's the right approach. We really support that bill from Representative Winnegar, and he came up with a really good idea to use the unclaimed property fund when there are assets in there, whether they could be ETH, could be all these other assets. If they have them and they're controlling them, they should be allowed to stake them, and that way, when they stake them, they're generating revenue, and they'll take that revenue and fund the strategic Bitcoin reserve with the money from the unclaimed property fund. So that's a totally different approach.
Interesting.
To how you do this. It's actually a budget neutral approach, which is the most interesting component. And we plan at Satoshi Action to now make that a part of our model policy playbook to enable these unclaimed property funds to be able to fund things like a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
That is so interesting. I never thought of that. And could that be used on the federal level as David Sachs and Bo Hines and these guys are looking for revenue neutral ways to buy Bitcoin?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It could be used that way.
Very interesting. I'm curious, will these states, and it may be too early to answer this question, look to mine Bitcoin or run a node or validator? Could they use, like for example, Texas, they got a lot of energy, maybe they have blow off excess and all that, use it to mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely. I think the state of New Hampshire is very interested in mining Bitcoin. They don't have a lot there right now. But states like New Hampshire and other forward-looking states do really want to increase the amount of Bitcoin that they're mining. And I mean, there could be very interesting ways to approach the incentivization of the growth of Bitcoin mining and like use some of the mined Bitcoin to fund the strategic Bitcoin reserve. We certainly played around with these ideas, and we would support any type of effort to move that direction. The only unfortunate component of that is obviously that would be, most likely come in the way of some type of tax. But maybe there's a way to incentivize Bitcoin mining growth in the state or the country that doesn't come across as like a tax on those miners and enables the country or the states to be able to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve based off of those earnings. On running a node, yeah, certainly we'd love to see these states boot up their own node. And part of what we do also at Satoshi Action is we protect the ability to run a node. We've passed that into law in multiple states, and it'd be great to see a state itself actually have their own node.
Yeah, that would be really great. With regards to the next states that may get this signed into law, you mentioned Arizona. Who do you think might be the next that is legitimately on the table that could get this done this year?
I'll give you the top five in no uncertain order. Arizona certainly has a chance to get it done. They've got they've got two more bills. One was vetoed. It's three more, excuse me. They've got one that was vetoed, and they've got three more bills that could enable them to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I mentioned one earlier, that's HB 2749. That's sitting at the governor's desk right now. We have heard that she would sign that bill into law from multiple different people that are familiar with what's happening there, and our contacts and our conversations that we're having. Then you also have states like North Carolina, where the Speaker of the House there is actually the one carrying the bill. So that carries a ton of weight. And we see that a lot of other folks in the state are very much getting behind the bill. We saw it pass out of the House there recently. We also have, of course, Texas, where we've seen the lieutenant governor come out in support of the legislation and make it a priority. Now, the Texas process has been a little bit slower than I think some people would have anticipated. It got through the Senate, and now we're waiting for it to be, going through the House version. They did have a public hearing on that recently, of course. So excited to see it, continuing to make progress. And then also we have Ohio as well, who they're a year-round legislature, so they're going to be bringing that bill back up here very soon. And then Pennsylvania is another year-round legislature where we will probably see another stab at this legislation. Last time it was with Representative Cabell, but he's since left the legislative body. But now we're working with another representative there who is actually is one of the best at speaking about Bitcoin from a lawmaker's perspective. He can speak about Bitcoin almost better than me. I was pretty impressed by it. I won't name names so we don't get ahead of ourselves, but there'll be some pretty big news coming out of Pennsylvania and the effort to try to get that state to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve here very shortly.
That's exciting, man. And just congrats and great work on your end and the folks at the Satoshi Action Fund. How can folks support you guys and even, contact the representatives and get all this thing going?
Great question. Really important part of the process is getting advocates and individuals to participate in the process. So we highly encourage people to use our advocacy tools when we launch them. We have had a couple of campaigns that we've done on strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation at the state level and the federal level as well. When we do those campaigns, people certainly need to go use our one-click tool to send a letter. We pre-craft the letters for folks if they want to use them, and that enables them to be able to, with literally a click of a button, send letters to all their lawmakers. We've had over 230,000 letters get sent to lawmakers at the state and federal level that way. I should say collectively 230,000, not 230 and 230. So 230,000 letters total have been sent to lawmakers in this country. So that's a great and important way to go about it. But also, reaching out to them individually and just letting them know, like giving them a call to their office and saying, hey, I support this legislation or I oppose this anti-Bitcoin legislation. That goes a long way towards building the collective effort to get to the consensus that we need to be at in order to move the right direction on Bitcoin and digital asset policy.
Great stuff, man. And I'm curious if a country in Europe or some country in Africa called you up and say, Dennis, we want to do what New Hampshire did and give us the model. Are you guys able to support them?
Yeah, to the support to the extent that we can. Obviously, we got to be careful with lobbying laws in those countries as being from the outside. But we've already had multiple countries reach out to us about this process and try to have us help them in the process of getting their state position or their country position to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So yes, we will try to support them to the best that we can. And yes, they already have begun reaching out to us.
Wow. Dennis, great stuff. I hope our next conversation, maybe in a couple months or 3 months, will be 3 more states have signed this into law. Great stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. I think we can get at least 3 this year. That would be, I think, a big win. I think 5 is probably the absolute max that it could be at this point. So getting to 3 would be huge. Typically, we set a standard of just trying to get 2 across the finish line because 1 is great, but people always wonder if it's a one-hit wonder. So you got to get that second one in there to really prove that this is something that has the political support that we all believe and know that it does, and to show that this is an idea that's really taking off. So that second state will be, I wouldn't say more important, but be very important, almost as important as the first one.
Good stuff, Dennis. Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Tony.